Mitchell reports, John McCain remembered. Moments from now, the McCain family returning to the state capitol in Arizona before the Arizona farewell to Senator McCain. The decorated war hero's casket, kissed by his widow, Cindy, his daughter, Megan, overcome with emotion. Late Wednesday, several of McCain's children came back to greet and hug some of the 15,000 people who stayed for all hours, coming to pay their respects to the man who represented Arizona for more than 30 years. Nearly a quarter of the Senate here in Washington left the Capitol early this morning to be in Phoenix for today's service. The memorial, the speakers, the readings, and the music, all selected by John McCain personally in the year since his diagnosis, including asking his good friend, former Vice President Joe Biden, to deliver one of today's eulogies. Their friendship reflected in their last public appearance together at the Constitution Center in Philadelphia almost 1 year ago.
I hope he has heard, too, my profession of gratitude for his friendship and love these many years. It's meant a lot to me.
It was always duty, honor, country. That's John. John understands what it means to sacrifice for what you believe in, to put the greater good ahead of personal feelings.
Good day, everyone. I'm Andrea Mitchell in Washington. As friends and family in Arizona and throughout the nation pausing to remember the life and the legacy of John Sidney McCain III. Today, the late senator will be honored at the only public service in his home state, at the North Phoenix Baptist Church, where 24 senators, including 10 Democrats, have also gathered. Tonight, as you see these live pictures of the hearse traveling through the state capitol at this hour, a motorcycle escort, of course. Tonight, that casket from the hearse will be flown to Washington, D.C., where Senator McCain will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol in the Rotunda. He will be only the 31st person to be honored in that fashion in American history. And finally, after Friday's service at the Rotunda, on Saturday, Senator McCain will be remembered at a memorial service at the National Cathedral, eulogized by former presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama, his two opponents, selected by him for that honor, before a private burial on Sunday at the Naval Cemetery in Annapolis. Among the attendees at today's service, former National Security Advisor, retired three-star General H.R. Mcmaster. Today, in an essay in Foreign Affairs, General Mcmaster writes about McCain: he was zealous in his defense of democracy and his condemnation of autocracy. As we see the family arriving, Cindy McCain, flanked on one side, of course, by Senator McCain's son, John, as well as Jimmy, one formerly a Marine, the other active duty Navy, and the other members of the McCain family. And as they arrive, continuing with this very personal reflection from General Mcmaster, writing in Foreign Affairs today, that he was zealous in his defense of democracy and his condemnation of autocracy, that McCain's passion sometimes gave rise to his famous temper, but that temper was always directed at those who threatened what he held so dear, the freedom, liberty, and humaneness denied him for over half a decade in a prisoner of war camp. Joining me now for his first television interview since leaving the White House, former National Security Advisor H.R. Mcmaster, now a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. And General Mcmaster, while we watch the casket and the honorary pallbearers, we're going to be talking about the life and legacy of John McCain. Thank you for joining us in this very emotional, very personal tribute. First to you.
Well, thank you, Andrea. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about a real American hero.
As a lifelong military man, someone who's written about Vietnam importantly, let's talk about the legacy of his service in Vietnam and what he did to heal the wounds from that war.
Well, John McCain had a lot of wonderful qualities, and one of them was empathy. He always tried to understand complex situations and problems from the other person's perspective. And so what he saw is after the Vietnam War, after the disaster of that war and his personal scars associated with it and the tremendous sacrifices he made, he saw that Vietnam's interests were aligning with those of our country. And he thought, well, this is the time. This is the time for us to bring our country back to Vietnam and to start to develop what is now, I think, a very positive relationship with a strategically important country. So John McCain had empathy, he had vision, and he was just a tremendous statesman committed to our nation and doing what's in his fellow Americans' interests.
And we're going to pause, General, as we watch the pallbearers carrying Senator McCain, the casket, the family lined up out. The family lined up outside the church. The service members are from the Arizona National Guard. Of course, after these services in Phoenix, Senator McCain's body will be flown to Washington, where he will lie in state in the rotunda, lie in repose, I should say, in the rotunda at the U.S. Capitol. There have been thousands of Arizonans and people from all over the country. Our colleague Peter Alexander interviewed a Vietnamese family, formerly Vietnamese family, that drove from California to honor Senator McCain. And General Mcmaster, that fits with your theme about the peace and reconciliation that he pursued diplomatically, helping former President Bill Clinton achieve a peace agreement and diplomatic recognition to Vietnam, a former adversary, former enemy, of course. That was an important part of his legacy, General.
It was. And I think what the senator took out of his experience in Vietnam and his fellow Americans' experience in Vietnam was a sense of duty to ensure that whenever we commit America's sons and daughters to conflict, we have to demand a strategy that will deliver an outcome worthy of the risks and sacrifices America's sons and daughters make. And so the senator was a tremendous advocate for winning in war, winning in conflict, when at a time when really that had become almost unfashionable. And so I have a personal debt of gratitude to him, as do, I think, any soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq for his oversight role of those wars to ensure that we were aiming all of our efforts at achieving an outcome that was worthy of the sacrifices our troops were making there.
As the late senator, of course, planned his own funeral, it's significant that he invited Presidents George W. Bush and President Obama to be giving his eulogies on Saturday at the National Cathedral. That's clearly a recognition that they were his opponents, but that he believes in reaching across the aisle. They became his friends. He worked with both of them on national security issues. It's also implicitly a rebuke against someone he did not want to be there, President Trump.
Right. Well, I think what Senator McCain has become and will remain in our memory and in his legacy is a unifying force for the country. And what the senator lamented in his last years, and he was very eloquent about this, is this polarization of American society and really the opportunity that presents for Russians and others who are trying to undermine our democracy, undermine our confidence in who we are as a people and our values and our democratic processes and institutions. And what John John McCain did across his whole life is brought people together in our common identity as Americans, and our common values in individual rights and rule of law and freedom of speech and freedom of religion and tolerance. And so we should learn from John McCain's example now, because it's really a critical time for our country. And I hope that we can transform his memory, what we remember about him and his tremendous qualities, into a legacy that helps bring Americans together.
One of the most striking references, of course, was one of his final references after the Helsinki summit, when he called the president's performance one of the most disgraceful performances because of what he viewed as being much too accommodating to Vladimir Putin. How did that strike you?
Well, what John McCain has always been is a very strong advocate, and he always will remain, through his memory and his legacy, an advocate for what makes America unique. And, there are some people who think it's okay to apologize, for America, when I think what we ought to do is extol our virtues, recognizing that this republic is imperfect. We will always have work to do. But America has been a tremendous force for good in the world. And John McCain would say that unabashedly. And I think it's also very clear that there are autocratic, closed models that are now competing with our free, open, and democratic model. We have to compete effectively. And so what Putin has been able to do is he has been able to really operate in a way that has been largely uncontested across the free world, not just in the United States, but in like-minded countries. So it's time to listen to John McCain and to confront this kind of sustained campaign of propaganda, disinformation, and political subversion. I mean, what these autocratic societies want to do is they want to polarize our communities. They want to pit us against each other. Well, let's just celebrate together today the life of a tremendous hero, John McCain. His birthday was yesterday. Let's celebrate his birthday and remember his legacy and protect his legacy by coming together as Americans and be proud of who we are as a nation.
I know this is difficult for you. I have to ask you how you felt about what many people felt was really disrespectful. The American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign War, all pressing the president to lower the flag at the White House, which remained flying at full staff on Monday for quite a while.
Well, we all have an opportunity to transcend all of that and to make our personal choice to celebrate a tremendous life, a life of a real servant to the nation. And what I hope also, I hope that Senator McCain's example will draw more people to government service and service in the military in particular. I mean, this is a man who committed his entire life to service, and this is a family that's committed to service as well. And I think what we often see are the tough circumstances that are associated with military service, but we don't get to see a lot are the less tangible rewards. John McCain was a very happy man. He had a great sense of humor. He was a joy to be around. And I think it was because he drew that happiness and that contentment from a life of service to his country. So maybe today we can all talk to young people across our country and talk to them about the real joys and rewards of service to the nation.
And one of the things that you've witnessed in the field, as well as from a vantage point of watching here in Washington, is the way he took on the generals and the admirals, the brass. He loved to be in the field, in combat zones, hearing from the troops themselves as to what they needed and what they weren't getting. And then we certainly watched hearing after hearing when he would challenge the top leaders and demand answers as to why things weren't going better. While we watch these live pictures, I'm reluctant to interrupt and play these examples, but I think you know full well what it must have been like for some of them to be grilled by John McCain, the ranking member, and then the chairman on armed services.
Yeah. Well, John McCain was democracy in action, right? That's what you want from the people's representatives. That's the essence of our democracy, is that oversight role of our Congress in the House and in the Senate. And he took that very seriously. And he was an advocate for the American people, our security and our interests. And that's where I really got to know him. And as one of the three amigos, who at the time it was Senator Graham and Senator Lieberman and Senator McCain, they seemed like they were always in Iraq and Afghanistan. And and asking, as you mentioned, all the tough questions. And that's the essence of our democracy, and he embodied that, and it's one of the reasons why he's a true American hero.
I know you were in touch with him during his final days. Can you share some of those conversations?
Well, he was where he wanted to be, at his beautiful home in Sedona, surrounded by his loving, tremendous family, and he was as gracious in his final days as he was in his earlier years. And in the interactions I had with him, he was always asking about, well, how are you doing? I mean, and then also, you know, talking to you about what your plans are going to be. And so he never wanted to talk about himself. So today, I'm sure he's looking down on us and saying, boy, you guys are making too big of a deal of this, you know. But that's part of who he is. He was a humble servant of the nation who was just a wonderful person to be around. He had a great sense of humor. You know, he had the temper too, but that temper was always directed at those who he felt maybe were, you know, obstructing really what America should be, you know, and we're all going to miss him. John McCain, really, he's irreplaceable. He was a fine man and a tremendous servant to our nation.
Having served in the White House, served in the field, in the military, of course, for so many years, how important was it that he stood up for the Geneva Conventions and opposed the enhanced interrogations known as torture, and was an ally of a Democrat, Dianne Feinstein, in a very contentious debate?
Well, you know, there are a lot of issues, that being one of them, that ought to bring Americans together. What's extraordinary to think about our time today is, even when there ought to be a basis for agreement, it seems that people, just to be contrary, want to take the opposite position. So I think in the area of national security and how we conduct ourselves abroad, the wars in which our young men and women are fighting, that ought to bring us together, right? I mean, who's for a North Korea with a nuclear weapon? Who's for a terrorist safe haven across the greater Middle East or in Afghanistan? I mean, we ought to be able to come together on these important issues. And John McCain was a force for unifying the country. And so that's what we're going to miss maybe more than anything. And what we need is really for all of us to step up, every American, to find common ground. What if we gave, Andrea, what if we just gave equal time to every time we disagree about something? Why don't we give equal time to something we agree about and talk about that as well?
Well, General H.R. Mcmaster, I know this is a difficult time. Our condolences to you, to your family, and to all who are serving and who are so close to the McCains. Thank you very much for being with us on a very important day.
Thanks for the opportunity, Andrea. Thank you. Thank you.
And joining us now, NBC's Kelly O'Donnell, of course, outside the church in Phoenix.